Let me give you a couple of instances where I've worked with both public sector and social enterprise to build something worthwhile and sustainable. And I'll take you for a moment to Mozambique. Mozambique in Africa was one of the most deprived areas in Africa. It sits just above South Africa. And they had decided to build an aluminium smelter in Mozambique some years ago. And it was an exceptional enterprise, both in terms of its scale and in terms of what it could offer in employment and development. And my company were bidding to develop all of the support services for the construction, which would take 5 years, of this massive aluminium smelter. In doing so, I went to Mozambique and met with some government officials and then with a major NGO, a non-governmental organization. That NGO was headed by a lady called Graça Machel. Graça Machel is now Nelson Mandela's wife, but then was the widow of the former president of Mozambique who had died in an air crash. And in talking to the government and in talking to Graça Machel, I discovered what the key issues were socially within Mozambique. And the biggest issue of concern for both the government and for the NGO was the lack of education for children and for women. So, when putting our bid together for the contract, which was a very significant contract for developing all of the support services for the construction phase of this major contract, we put into our bid a program where each day, when the men going into the construction had left the buildings where they got breakfast, we converted the building into classrooms. We brought from South Africa some young student teachers and some from Mozambique, and we brought the children in of the men who were working on the construction and their mothers and wives, and we conducted classes. This was over a 5-year period. And having done so, we started to develop an education platform for those children and for those women. And when the program was over, at the 5 years, we donated the buildings and we continued to fund the education programs for the children and for their mothers. And that continues today. There you have private sector, public sector, and social enterprise working hand in hand, collaboratively, to deliver something worthwhile and sustainable off the back of a major commercial contract. The reason we were able to build a 1.7 billion business was because every contract that we looked to enter into, we looked as an intrinsic part of that contract to deliver social enterprise. And we developed within our own business a head of social enterprise. It made us successful, it made our contract sustainable, and it built long-term relationships at government, private sector, and social sector, which had mutual benefit. So, go back to that first cliche. If we are truly to build a social enterprise network, we must ensure that private sector and public sector take responsibility for supporting and engaging In that way, I'm certain, I'm absolutely certain, that we can develop a much more collective economy for the benefit of all, the true benefit of all.